I have a quick question, Stuart, because I wasn't there last night. What date is the retreat? I'd like to know.
Well, the Rudy's Samadhi is on the 21st, which I think is a Friday or a Thursday. So it would be the weekend after that, 23rd, 4th, or 22nd, 23rd.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. For those of you who don't know about these retreats, I used to do them like literally monthly somewhere in the world. And they're very powerful weekends in which we do 3 classes a day, and each class consists of a meditation, hands-on healing, talk, question and answers. And by the end of the weekend, these retreats are extremely transformative, very powerful. They go deep. They require, really a depth of surrender and inner work. And it really is amazing to see how it transforms people. And I used to do them 1, sometimes even 2 a month in traveling until I finally had to quit the traveling. It just became too much. But I would like to do maybe 2 a year, one on Rudy Samadhi, another one in August for my birthday. And, if people want to attend, they're very welcome. I'd like to get a group of names, hopefully at least 20 people. And then I'll give the names to Jennifer and she'll contact you all and talk about all the particulars involved. Does anyone have a question they would like to ask? Oh, somebody's got to have a question.
I have a question. Stuart, you were talking about Denton before, and you said that Rudy said 3 weeks, but it ended up being 9 years.
Yeah, it's true.
And so is that like a learning process, like making things more difficult than they had to be? Can you speak to that a little bit in a spiritual growth?
I can very much speak to that. It was a very important element of my life because when I was younger, I always had a difficult time completing things, finishing cycles, all kinds of cycles, relationship cycles and financial cycles. And Rudy, it's an interesting story, okay? Rudy and Swami Muktananda and a whole coterie of people, including myself, went to Dallas. We stayed at the Dallas Hilton. And, it was a week of satsangs and, spiritual practice and all that. But in the midst of all that, a group of young people came and met Rudy, and they got very entranced with Rudy's work. Rudy and I went up to Denton, to look at what their situation. They had a restaurant there called the Cosmic Kitchen, and they lived in this house on Locust Street. And, and they were very deeply interested in Rudy's meditation practice. And, when I got back to New York, Rudy maintained contact with them. And one day, this is interesting because Rudy had told me about a month before, after we got back from Texas, he no longer wants me teaching his meditation or something like that. About a month, 2 months anyway. And it was also a major, and very deep change that had to take place in my life. And I went into the meditation room, I sat down and I worked with a big picture of Swami Nityananda, and he came out of my heart. And he said to me, look, Stuart, if you don't teach the meditation, all Rudy is doing is cutting you back to your roots. It's the first time in your life you'll be able to grow organically without having some image of your own self-importance. And, and I went back to Rudy's gallery. I gave him a big hug and I said, Rudy, thank you. And his response was just incredible. He smiled at me and said, I didn't think you'd get it this quickly. And I said, well, God bless, Swami Muktananda, Swami Nityananda, who truly gave me the answer that I was looking for, that I needed. At any rate, about a month went by, and these people in Texas called up Rudy. And they said, we need a teacher here. It's very chaotic. Everything is going crazy here. We need somebody to teach classes to do. So Rudy looks at me. I'm sitting there and working with him and doing a meditation. And he said, Stuart, I want you to go to Texas. So I said to him, Rudy, what am I supposed to do there? So he really got upset at me. And he said, what do you mean? I said, Rudy, you told me I'm not a teacher. So he said, he smiled and he said, I want you to go there and teach. He said, you're really learning, So it changed my life. It really enabled me to go in a healthy, organic way. And he said, I want you to go there for 3 weeks. And I said, 3 weeks is fine. I never had any intention or plans or even wanting to live in a place like Denton, Texas. I lived in Paris, I lived in Rome, I lived in Berlin, I lived in a lot of very sophisticated London in my life, Greece, Marrakesh, on and on and on, and he sent me to Denton, Texas. And I said, okay, I got there. And the first thing I discovered that these kids were the biggest drug dealers in Texas. They were selling marijuana, piles of it they had. And I told them, look, I said, I'm not going to stay here. One of the only rules of Rudy's meditation is no drugs. And I said, I'm not going to stay here. I'm going to tell Rudy about this and you'll never see him again. I said, you got to flush all these drugs down the toilet and we got to move on from this. About 3/4 of the people got up and left. And I was left with about 4 or 5 people who did flush the drugs down the toilet. And we started a meditation center there. And then people started coming. Bob Singh came, Bob Baker came, he's called Silver Rod today. And people started coming and growing, and we started developing a situation. Now, Rudy told me, you're there for 3 weeks. About 2 months later, he came down to Denton to visit and to teach. And I said to him, we're driving in a car in the countryside. I said, Rudy, this has been a hell of a 3 weeks. And he looked at me and he said, you're on your 4th day. And what he told me is that time is irrelevant. You're here to fulfill a cycle of growth. You're here to learn whatever you have to learn and grow and develop your spiritual life and your commitment to God and doing spiritual work. And 3 weeks, it's like, the earth was created in 7 days, 3 weeks. And it took me literally 9 years to complete that cycle. After we built a house, we had bakeries and candy business, restaurants, and it was unbelievable what we had going on there. I realized that there's nothing else I can do here. There's nothing else I can do here. And it was a huge situation that would have grown into something much bigger even, And I announced to everybody, I have to go back to New York. And I did it on the advice of a very great Rinpoche who I met in India, Kala Rinpoche. And, also, I won't go into this story, but I've told it a lot. It's a classic story that you might read in a Tibetan text, And at the end, I asked him if I should move back to New York. And he said, you have to move back to New York. If you go back to New York, your teachings will be known all over the world. And he didn't even know what I taught, but he saw the way I was sitting there and working. And I think Bob Baker was with me. He was working and he knew we were doing something special. He said, your teachings will be known all over the world. And 3 or 4 months later, I went back to New York. Or a while later, whenever it was, I went back to New York. And it was exactly what happened. Within 3 years, I was teaching all over Europe and South America, Greece and Zurich and Paris and Berlin. And it was unbelievable what was going on in my life. Kathmandu, we had an ashram, you know. Chris was running an ashram in Kathmandu. She was doing an extraordinary job there of teaching Hindus and Buddhists and Westerners. And I mean, it just grew beyond all comprehension. My belief that anything could grow like that. But it was that 9 years that made it possible. It was completing the cycle that made it possible for that to happen. And I remember standing on the street, you know, there was a funeral parlor across the street from the ashram. And I knew the guy who ran it. His name was Schmitz or something like that. And I'm standing there talking to him, you know, and he says to me, Stuart, he said, I buried the best of them, you know, governors and senators and doctors. I said, Jack, you're not going to bury me. Told him that, you're not going to bury me, Jack. I'm getting out of town. I'm going to be leaving dead soon. You know, and I had to do it. You know, staying there probably would have been the end of my life, because I had done everything conceivable possible what I could do there. And I needed a bigger situation. And the 9 years, the 3 weeks were fulfilled. But it took 9 years to fulfill those 3 weeks. And without the 9 years, I could have never done what I was doing when I moved back to New York. I mean, I felt like Shiva with 8 arms juggling. I mean, it was unbelievable what was going on. And I was like Shiva with 6 arms in Denton. I had so many things going on, you know, and it took the wherewithal to commit to finishing the cycle that enabled the whole thing, enabled that house to be built, an extraordinary house in Denton. You know, it enabled all of it to take place. So what I'm saying is cycles come. We too easily ignore them, run away from them. You know, something happens, we get upset, we get irritated. You know, you know, you gotta take it deep inside and learn, what am I learning here? What is this doing to really affect my life in a deep way? How will I ultimately come out of this? You know, if I truly go to the end and finish up the cycle. So that's really what happened, you know, and the 3 weeks was actually 9 years. And when Rudy was down there, I was on my 4th day. Well, the other 3 days, you know, took 8.5 years, you know, to finish. But I am grateful in my heart that I finished them, because without having done that, I couldn't be sitting here and doing what I'm doing now with all of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Does anyone else have a question they would like to ask? And that story with Kala Rinpoche is one of the great stories of my life. I mean, if you want, you know, it's in some of my books, you can read about it. It's an incredible story of what happened with that very, very kind of saintly man, extraordinary Tibetan Rinpoche teacher. But he was the one who said, you've got to go back to New York. Does anyone else have a question they would like to ask? And everybody has cycles, everybody has beginnings, middles, and ends, things they have to accomplish in their life. And completing cycles is really an important thing. And knowing when they're finished. Understand? I mean, I remember somebody was getting a divorce and was going through hell, and I told her, God created marriage, God created divorce. You know, the beginnings and ends. You have to know when things are finished. You have to know when things are blossoming and growing. And that's with everything. It's with business, it's with money, it's with, otherwise we wind up torturing ourselves, doing things and trying to finish things, that sometimes can't even be finished or are finished. And we keep beating a dead horse.
Is that like because we think it has to resolve in a way that we think it has to resolve rather than just like relaxing into the
Yes,
cycle?
exactly. We think it should resolve in a certain way. And if we live in a state of surrender, we discover how it'll really resolve. If you open to what you're learning in the moment, you discover how things truly dissolve themselves and how you can move on to the next cycle that will come. Once you finish a cycle, there's always a new cycle that will come. With me, it's always been not what I want. You understand? I learned how to surrender that having my ass kicked by Rudy. It was what I need to grow and get closer to my enlightenment, what I need to do. And what I need to do is always almost diametrically opposed to what I wanted to do, you know? And I learned how to surrender this I want thing when I lived in Rudy's house. Because I honestly had no choice in the matter. And it became, Stuart, what do you need? I need to get the teachings of Rudy. Whatever price I have to pay, I need to get those teachings. He was the greatest master I ever was around, and I've been around a number of them, and I needed to get what he had to teach. And how was I going to know that that particular cycle would end on a mountaintop in the Catskill Mountains in a plane crash? And then there was a new cycle. What did I learn in this last 6 years? And how can I apply it to my life? And can I continue to do God's work without Rudy kicking me in the ass every day? New cycle. And that took many years to complete. So it's not what you want. Honestly, it's really what you need. And you have to be in touch with that need. And then when you need something, you're willing to do whatever it takes to get it. And that happened with Rudy. I mean, I, I remember walking, I had no place, I talked about this a lot. Okay, I'll repeat it again. I had no place to sleep in his house. There were 20 people living on a floor that I used to live in on by myself, And I complained to him, and he pointed a weed in the crack of a New York City sidewalk. And he said, that weed has more courage than you, has more guts than you. And instead of being, getting angry at that, I looked at that weed and I said, he's right. I mean, the guts, the courage to live your life in a crack in a New York City sidewalk. And I'm complaining. He said, you're not there. Why are you there? You're there to get my teachings. That really determines what you get in life. And as I said the other day, a month later, he came up to me. I really understand, Stuart. I travel a lot. I go to India. Every time I leave New York, you can stay in my apartment. So things change, but you have to be so in touch with need and never confuse it with what you want, because what you want leads to the grave. What you need leads to spiritual enlightenment. And I can only talk from my own experience. I don't read about these things in books. I write about them in books. I don't read about them in books, and I don't, it's not intellectual knowledge. I'm talking about living experience. What I learned from one of the greatest masters who ever taught meditation, in the Western Hemisphere. And what price I had to pay to be there and do it with him, regardless. Now, that's not for everybody, but it certainly was for Stuart when he was a young man, and it's for Stuart today. Does anyone else have a question they would like to ask? And what we need and what we want is like a battle of dragons in the cosmos. It really is.
So if you know exactly what you need, but you don't want to do it, how do you kick yourself in the butt?
Well, you find out what you need, because what you need is deep inside you, and you open to that hunger in yourself to have a spiritual life. And if you tap that hunger inside, you will discover, you will do what you need to get there. And the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, it will provide everything you need. It will provide it. I promise you this. Once you tap that need, and it's deep inside every human being. I want to get my enlightenment. What do I have to do to get there? What do I need to do to get there? I mean, look at the story of, with Milarepa, and it's a great Tibetan Buddhist saint, who was a magician, a black magician. I think he was even a murderer and a robber. And he finally said, I got to stop this, and I need training, how to do it. He went to Marpa, who was a great Mahasiddha who lived in some mountain. And Marpa, he said to Marpa, I would like to study with you. What do you want me to do? Marpa said, build me a house. Right there. So Milarepa worked and built Marpa a house for Marpa and his wife to live in. And when he finished it, Marpa said to Milarepa, look, I want you to tear down the house and build me another one over there. And Milarepa wound up building 13 houses for Marpa. 13 houses. That level of surrender, that level of doing what he needed to do instead of what he wanted, it made him the great poet saint of Tibet. Every time you see an image of Milarepa, he's sitting there with his hand on his ear, listening to the cosmos. He needed to do it because he knew while doing it, he was getting these extraordinary teachings from Marpa. And as long as he did it, he would get, until Marpa was finished with it, he would get those teachings. Not everybody is Milarepa. Very few Milarepas, but I'm saying we all have things like that in our own way. And that's what Swami Nityananda told me. Rudy said to me, I finished college, and he told me something amazing is going to happen to you when you finish college. And I graduated, and I went to him, I said, what's going to happen? He said, go get a master's degree. And he told me, I said, oh shit, it's the last thing in the world I wanted to do, And so I went and I meditated, and Swami Nityananda came out of my heart and said, Stuart, if you go get a master's degree, he said, the next 2 years, Rudy will have to give you every single conceivable piece of teaching that he gets. He will have to pass on because you are listening to him and you're doing what he asked you to do. So I went back and told them, all right, I didn't even know what to study. You know, by the end of the summer, I had worked so hard that I looked at him one day in the car going back from Big Indian, and I said, Rudy, do I really have to get a master's? And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, no, you really are finished with that. You've gone past it. But I would have done it. And for 2 years, I would have been getting the most extraordinary teachings from Rudy. I got them anyway, you know, but by not doing what I wanted to do, but doing what I need to do to grow. I hope this is clear to all. This is not easy stuff. And it goes against almost everything we're taught from the earliest ages, you know? But it's very valid stuff. And
It's 9
especially
o'clock.
if somebody needs to have a spiritual life. And nobody should be in these classes unless they truly want a spiritual life. Because these classes are very strong, they're profound, they're very deep. So if you open in that depth inside yourself, you will be shown, I promise you, the universe will bring you things. First, you're going to freak out, and then you're going to say, okay, what is this going to, how am I going to grow because of this? Does anyone else have a question? I hope this is clear. I mean, as I say, it's difficult stuff. It's difficult stuff to digest. But it's stuff that I learned from direct experience from my teacher, Rudy. And without having learned this stuff, I couldn't have been alive or survived till today. And all the stuff that I've been through in my life, God bless. Airplane crashes and God only knows what else, you know? Okay, if there are no more questions, there'll be class tomorrow evening, and I'm looking forward to seeing everybody. If you want to attend the retreat, please email me, let me know. And, you know, again, as I always end these classes, God bless you all. And without you, I wouldn't have talked about what I'm talking about tonight. I wouldn't have taught this class tonight. So it's really this marriage, and very important marriage, that takes place that enables things of incredible profundity to manifest, things I listen to because I need to learn about them also. So God bless you all, and thank you. And in all humility, I hope to see everyone tomorrow, and bless you.
Thank you, Stuart. I wouldn't have
Thank you.
got through it today without you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Stuart. Good
Thank
night.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.